Good evening everyone, my name is Lautaro and I will be your guide today. During this walking tour, we are going to discover the historical heart of Moreno. Even though Moreno is part of the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, it has its own history, identity and cultural heritage. Today, we are visiting some of the landmarks that help us understand how this community developed, from the arrival of the railway in the 19th century to the historic buildings that still surround us today. So let's begin our tour right here at Moreno Railway Station. This station is actually a very important place to begin our story. The railway arrived in Moreno on April 12, 1860, when the Western Railway connected this area with the city of Buenos Aires. The arrival of the train was a turning point for the local community. It encouraged communication, transportation, eventually development of the town around the railway. In fact, the first train arrived with two formations called La Constitución and La Porteña. And there is a fascinating detail here. On the same day, a telegraph communication was made between the Del Parque station in Buenos Aires and Moreno to report the departure of the train. Now, let's continue our walk towards the historic center of the main square. Our next stop is only a short walk away. And here we are, Plaza Mariano Moreno. This is one of the most important public spaces in the city and an essential part of Moreno history. In fact, this was the first main square of the town. The plaza is surrounded by several buildings and institutions that tell us a great deal about the history of Moreno. On different sides of the square, we can find the Municipal Palace, the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Rosary, and the railway station that we visited a few minutes ago. This is what made this area particularly interesting for visitors. Several important elements of Moreno history are concentrated within a relative small area. But a historic square is not only about the buildings around it. Public squares have traditionally been meeting places for local communities. They are spaces where people celebrate, protest, meet friends, attend ceremonies, or simply spend time outdoors. And that is also part of what makes Plaza Mariano Moreno interesting today. It connects the historical identity of the city with its everyday life. Before we continue, I'd like to draw your attention to the monument dedicated to Mariano Moreno. Mariano Moreno was one of the most important political figures on the May Revolution of 1810. He was a lawyer, journalist, and revolutionary thinker who played an important role during the early stages of Argentina's independence process. The monument here is particularly significant because the square itself carries his name. It also reminds us that the history of a city is often reflected in the names of its streets, squares, and monuments. When we walk through a place like this, we are not only seeing architecture, we also seeing how a community chooses to remember its past. And now let's take a look at one of the most important buildings surrounding the square. Right in front of us, we can see the Municipal Palace of Mariano. This building represents another important aspect of the historic center, the relationship between the city and its local government. Together with the plaza and the cathedral, the Municipal Palace forms part of the institutional heart of Moreno. This concentration of civic and religious buildings around a central square is a characteristic feature of many historic towns and cities in Argentina. The square becomes a kind of meeting point between public life, religion, administration, and everyday activities. Take a moment to look at the facade. Instead of simply walking past it, notice how the building contributes to the character of this part of the city. This is one of the things I always recommend when visiting historic areas. Look up, look around, and pay attention into the details. Sometimes the most interesting stories are hidden in places we normally walk past without noticing. And now we are reached one of the oldest and most significant buildings in Moreno, the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Rosario. The history of this church goes back to the 19th century. The foundation stone was placed in 1873, and the church was inaugurated on November 5th, 1865. It was the first church in Moreno, and its history is closely connected with the development of the community. Originally, the building was much simpler than what we see today. Over time, it was expanded and amplified, including the addition of its tower. If you look at the tower, you can notice one of the most distinctive elements of the building. The tower was designed by the engineer Pedro Benoit, who was also involved in several important architectural projects in the province of Buenos Aires. The building was later restored and expanded during the following decade, while preserving important elements of its original structure. Finally, in 1917, when the Diocese of Moreno was created, the church officially became a cathedral. So when we look at this building today, we are looking at more than a church. We are looking at a building that was witnesses more than a century and a half of Moreno history. Our next step is particularly interesting because it allows us to go even further back into the history of Moreno. Let's continue walking towards to the Amancio Alcorta Historical Museum. Welcome to the Amancio Alcorta Museum and Archive. This museum is located in a historic house associated with Amancio Alcorta, a prominent 19th century political figure. The history of this property is closely connected with the origins of Moreno itself. The area was originally part of an old estate known as Paso del Rey, located near an important crossing of the river and along the historic Camino Real. During the 19th century, the property became associated with Amancio Alcorta and his family. One of the houses has a simple post-colonial design, while another section reflects the neoclassic architecture that became popular in the Rio de la Plata region during that period. Details such as the entrance, the columns, and the traditional layout help us imagine what life was like in the area more than 100 years ago. The museum preserves photographs, documents, and objects connected with the history of Moreno and its early inhabitants. It is also an archive, which means that it does not only display objects for visitors, it also helps preserve historical documents and information about the local community. If we look back at the places we have visited today, we can actually see a clear connection between them. The railway helped Moreno development as a town. The historic square became a central meeting point. The cathedral reflects the religious and social life of the community. The municipal palace represents the local government. And the Amancio Alcorta Museum preserves the memory and objects that help us understand the origins of the city. Together, these places tell the story of Moreno. Unfortunately, our tour is coming to an end. Today, we have explored some of the most significant landmarks in Moreno Historic Center and discovered how different places can help us understand the development of a community. We start in the railway station where the arrival of the train changed the history of the area. Then we visit Plaza Mariano Moreno, the historic center of the city, and explore the municipal palace and the cathedral of Our Lady of Rosario. Finally, we discovered the Amancio Alcorta Museum, where an important part of Moreno history preserved. I hope this tour show you that you don't always need to travel far to discover interesting places. Sometimes history is right in front of us, hiding in the streets, buildings, and public spaces that we see every day. Thank you very much for joining me today. It has been a pleasure being your guide today. I hope you enjoying discovering Moreno history with me, and I hope to see you again in another tour. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your visit.